All right, this won't take long. Today I get to tell you a story, which is the story of prions, which of the 5 types of pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungi, protists, and prions, are by far the weirdest. Not even really discovered as a type of pathogen until 20 or 30 years ago. And not widely believed when the first people did discover it. It was one of those that we run into again and again in science where there's something completely new that nobody's heard of before, and the first people to discover it are like, hey, there's this thing, and everybody's like, no, there's not this thing. It can't work like that. And here's why. Because prions are not cells like most kinds of pathogens. They don't even contain DNA like viruses do, which are kind of borderline between cells and not cells. And prions are just proteins. And remember, proteins are just chains of amino acids. How can that be something that creates an infectious disease? How can that be something that gets in someone's body and then gets spread to somebody else? Nobody believes it. So the first answer is most pathogens get in you and they replicate. This is a little different. These are basically proteins that look like your proteins. And when they get in you, they still kind of look like your proteins, but they are folded just slightly wrong. And remember, shape is everything for a protein. Shape is what lets them do their job. So it being misfolded means it doesn't work right. Not only that, it's kind of like, okay, do you know that one kid? Oh God. Just okay. Now just close your eyes for a second. Picture that one kid in your circle of like friends and acquaintances. It's the kid that if he's there, it becomes like 200% more likely that the cops are coming. If he's there, suddenly everybody's way more likely to get in trouble, right? That kid, the kid who's got enough charisma to convince other people to do stuff, enough guts to do the stuff, smart enough to convince people to do the stuff. Okay, so these are basically the juvenile delinquents of the protein world. They are misfolded proteins that can actually cause, it's almost like they can chemically convince your proteins to also misfold. Right, they're the peer pressure protein. Oh, weird. Like, yeah, maybe we should break into the concession stand and steal all the candy.
Not peer pressuring, just do it. Problem.
Yeah, I forgot to say, if you don't know that person, you are that person. And here's the biggest problem, is that these proteins don't mimic just any of your proteins. They look a lot like your brain proteins. So they cause what we call degenerative nerve diseases. In other words, they make your brain fall apart. They make you go crazy and then die.
Does something like this cause what's the word? It's brain bleeding, but I can't think of it.
Brain hemorrhage?
No. When like the brain like busts.
Aneurysm.
Aneurysm.
That one.
Not that I know. No. This is more like your brain falling apart. Turning into sponge. So okay, so when they discovered this, basically the barrier they had to understanding it was, how can these possibly be being passed on? Okay, I get it. You get enough of those proteins in your brain, they convince the other proteins to misfold, and your brain falls apart. But how did you get all those proteins in your brain in the first place? That was the mystery. Okay, so I'm going to kind of run the mystery by you step by step here by telling you what the diseases were that were discovered in order. Number one, which was thought to be kind of like an isolated, weird tropical disease, is a disease called Kuru. They discovered Kuru in some of the tribes of Papua New Guinea, which, if you don't know, is here off the coast, northern coast of Australia. Okay, Papua New Guinea, island nation. And in the tribes, some tribes of Papua New Guinea, they were seeing this disease where tribes people would suddenly go crazy in ways that weren't funny. You know, I know it sounds funny, but go crazy and then die. Then there's one in Scotland that doesn't affect people, it affects sheep. It's called scrapie, which again sounds funnier than it is. Scrapie is called that because in the early stages of going crazy, the sheep scrape themselves along like fence posts and stuff until their skin comes off. Like compulsive behavior, that kind of thing. Next was the one you've heard of. Mad cow disease.
Nice.
Actually called bovine spongiform encephalopathy.
Does it make their brains fall apart? What?
So great. That's the spongiform part. This is one of those names that's really long, but does describe pretty accurately what the disease does. Bovine means what? Cows. It means having to do with cows. Spongiform means it makes something look like a sponge. Encephalo, brain. Yeah. Encephalitis is swelling of the brain. Encephalopathy, pathy just means disease. So it's a brain disease in cows that makes their brains turn spongy. And then it turns out that there's a human version, right? Humans can get the same thing. We call it in humans Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. And so the question was, how are any of these diseases getting transmitted? How do the proteins get built up, concentrated enough in people, in sheep, in cows, to hit that critical, like, peer pressure level where the rest of the brain proteins collapse? Armani, you got a question?
Do we have to remember the names for like 3 or 4? Or can we just say
Be able to pick them out of the lineup. I probably won't make you like write them from scratch. So what's the link? Anybody know? This is the really weird, creepy part of the story. It was the first one. It was Kuru that kind of helped them figure it out, because they were like, okay, well, there's all these versions of prions now. Let's go back to those tribes and see what it is about them that might be a link to these other diseases.
Does it have to do with like blood transference?
No.
Their diet.
Yes.
Oh my.
Does it seem like animals that they eat?
Kinda.
Is it grass?
Nope. Is it what?
Is it poop?
Poop? No. 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 These tribes believe in something not so crazy, really. They believe that when an elder, a very powerful tribesperson dies, they want to not lose the knowledge and wisdom and power that tribesman has. So that they basically want a way to keep that wisdom and knowledge within the tribe.
They can't.
And they believe that wisdom and knowledge resides in not so crazy a place, in the brain of that tribesman. And so they figure, hey, so that we don't lose their knowledge, let's remove the brain from this tribesman who's passed away and divide it equally among like the tribe and consume it, so that we keep all the wisdom and knowledge they have.
Brains.
Do you see it though? Like how what we're looking at is a disease that only happens if you get enough of the proteins built up in your brain. and they're basically recycling brain, right? And so that's how it happened in them. Now, how do we apply that to cows and sheep? What's up with that? Anybody know? Anybody watch the right documentaries? Yeah, you're not gonna like this either.
Is it the fact that like when they're like in the I don't know the exact word, not like the farms, but like the places where you get like the milk from that they're like so like enclosed where that they eat each other. They don't.
Well, sort of. It's more us making it happen though.
So when they're like being processed,
Hmm.
like any leftovers, do they get like fed each other's leftovers?
Yeah, well, okay, so leftovers, yes. Also, if you know a cow drops dead in the field and they're not able to use it for meat for people, there's a thing called a rendering vat where you just basically throw animals or animal parts into it and it slowly heats them and melts them down into sludge, basically. And then, and this is done less than it used to be, mostly because of scares like mad cow disease. Then they pump all that sludge and soak the animal feed in it because there's nothing that makes animals get big, right? Than knowing exactly the right nutrients are in there, right? That's exactly what they need because it's what they're made of. And it worked. It just happened to recycle prions, right? Because of course there's brain matter in there. And so you're feeding the cows and sheep more and more of the prions that are in the ones that initially had it. So this kind of magnification effect. And then if you're wondering, well, how do humans get it? The last answer you're not going to like is you don't really completely 100% know what's in your ground beef. Inevitably, there's a little bit of brain matter in there. Yep, yep. Good stuff, huh? So this the key to the mystery of the story of prions was cannibalism. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good. Where are we at? We got, yeah, it's probably enough time.